G'day friends and fans, welcome to Dave Talks for Ukraine War Update for the 24th of July 2025. I'm your host, the author, David Applegate, author of the books The Boyhood of Cade, Power Games, Into the Ozmound, and The Erotic Tales from the Empire. Part 1 is available now on Amazon. Thank you for tuning in. I know there's a lot of misinformation out there right now, but I bring the receipts. Now, Bradleys and Hawks, now they're not talking about Black Hawks, they're talking about Hawk Air Defense. These are, actually that's the photo there right there. This is the latest arms sale to conclude. They've, in the round of funding between the EU and the US, because Ukraine's got no money. Ukraine's broke. There were allegedly explosions in Ukraine, but there weren't that many, and most of them didn't make the news. Now we'll get to what else is happening, of course, in the war. And here we have, of course, the photograph. There's no way, okay, he's blocking his ears. This is just another day in the propaganda machine for Ukraine. Fighting continues. Russia has struck energy facilities in Sumy cut power. Russian air defenses allegedly destroyed 33 drones. Allegedly there's been talks of a ceasefire and a prisoner swap. The ceasefire is proposed, however, there's a proposed meeting before the end of August between Zelensky and Russian President, which I'll get to later, but that is a huge move. So is discussing ceasefire and prisoner swaps, but we have some progress on ceasing of hostilities according to Ukraine. So Ukraine has made some concessions, and Russia has agreed to these concessions. So we're reaching the round of talks now that will shift from Russia, Ukraine to Russia, US. And I think EU is upset, but they may actually be included in the next round of talks. But they were excluded last time, but that's because they made some stupid statements and decided at the last minute to slap on some sanctions. I mean, not sanctions, tariffs. Same thing, right? Now, the State Department has approved the sale. Now, apparently there was no authorization from the president to stop the previous sale, which is the reason why people were fired, by the way, because they were trying to run the war themselves. Look what happened the last time the State Department ran a war. They ran it into the ground. Now, Donald Trump touted a recent deal. European allies are going to get weapons, and what weapons they want to send to Ukraine can be. Of course, there are certain weapons that can't be, but anything that's not on the sanctioned list can go to Ukraine. Chinese engines are being covertly shipped to manufacturers in Russia. True, but they're also being shipped to Ukraine via India, which they don't mention. Same with ammunition, which they don't mention. Zelensky's been buying ammunition and drone parts through Sudan and India. They don't, a lot of things are not mentioned. But Ukraine is trying to, still trying to acquire Israeli air defenses. I think they'll get second-hand equipment, which are basically Hawks and Patriots. Okay, for the first time since the beginning of the war, Zelensky has bowed to pressure from protests. This is the second day of protests have concluded, with several demands calling for a reversal of the law curbing the independence of the anti-corruption agencies. Zelensky has withdrawn his bill and is redrafting the law. Now, why did Zelensky pull the law in the first place? Well, they were getting too close to the truth, and he didn't want that coming out about how many of his cohorts and the people who put him into power have stolen from Ukraine and fled, and is now replacing those who fled with more cohorts, and he doesn't want them investigated. We'll get to that later, but Russia is basically preparing drills, keeping its nuclear readiness, but has said nothing about whether or not it will strike Ukraine if things go sour or south. Okay, so there was a prisoner exchange, both prisoners of war and civilian prisoners, those taken in the Kursk incursion, as well as, let's say, disruptive elements in Donetsk and Crimea, etc. Oh, trust me, a night you win, even if you win an election 99%, you're still going to have dissent, right? I think Russia never actually said they won by 90%. I think that was the Western media. I think the actual vote was something like 74. Now, explosions near Dnipro, of course, was caused a. Now, these were after. Sorry, these were they the same time or after? 13 hours. Yeah. Okay, there were protests during the day, and at some point, a few hours later, in the early evening, there was an explosion at the docks. Because don't forget, a lot of stuff in Ukraine moves by the river. It's where most of the Russians' drones have hit, but there's no actual missile or drone strike. This was believed to be internal sabotage and has caused a huge alert. But there were drone strikes in other places, but oddly enough, Russia never struck any areas where there were protests. And there are some markers that haven't been taken down yet. But there were more protests today. There was glide bombs dropped near Kharkiv. But that's about it. Russia withheld most of its drone and missile strikes, though they did hit. The initial reports say in Sumy, they also hit other areas of. This is the Ukrainian gas and oil company. It absorbed Burisma and others. Same old company, same old corruption, just new players at the helm. But eventually all state corporations are corrupt. It just depends how much. Remember, folks, they pay themselves a fortune. That in itself is corruption. Because they don't pay for the profit. They don't paid from the profits of the company. They're paid by you, the taxpayer. All right, so there's fighting up here in north. Multiple strikes on Sumy. Most of it, again, is about crippling the Ukrainian economy, which, of course, just like attacks on the Russian economy, the justification is, well, the economy fuels the war. All right, but we have what appears to be a digging in while here. So this is the cutoff. To obviously, control the road, cut off these towns. No, the siege around Kupiansk isn't as intense as Chavez Yar or other areas. There's been no movement most of the time north of Chavez Yar. Now, we're expecting a spring offensive, then a summer offensive. No offensive north of Chavez Yar has materialised. The two prepared offensives, which were trained for, have of course been here and here. Sorry. Here. That's from a few days ago. Alright, so the offensive continues here. They're back at this town. Now, there was no mention of a Ukrainian pushback or whatever. Same here. They're fighting on the this marker's in the wrong place. They're fighting on the outskirts of this town here. They've taken some territory. They're fighting to cut basically the Ukrainians, trying to force them out rather than trying to cut them down, all down. Though it looks like it's reducing to house-to-house fighting where they have to just literally root out those zealots, but they won't go peacefully, so they're going to have to pretty much hunt them down and execute them because they just won't give up. And that's the problem with fanaticism. They don't know how to coordinate. They're losing cohesion. They're acting like animals, and that makes them even more dangerous than an actual coordinated army. They're basically, Ukraine is sending its men to die because they can't fight as a cohesive unit. They basically just mob up, sit around all day waiting for the Russians to show up, and then they fight them. There's no strategy. There's no thinking. There's no there's 50 of us and 1,000 of them. Nah, we'll fight to the last man, comrades. So you're now depleting manpower that could have been elsewhere, providing a much greater coordinated defence, slowing down the Russian army and forcing them into the position where you can't take any more territory. Instead, they go around you and take more territory because you lack defence and lack a cohesive front line, which they punch through because they're too busy stuck defending positions they shouldn't be defending. They should be in basically a cohesive cauldron, sending reinforcements and materials constantly on a huge arc against the Russian front. Now, I'm not saying Ukraine could defeat Russia. I'm saying they could bring them to a standstill and that'll end the war. 6 months, it'll be over. It could have been over 2 years ago, and Ukraine wouldn't have lost all this territory. But you're dealing with idiots who have smooth brains, and smooth-brained people, lowest common denominator. Oh, but the cowboy movies, the Americans come at the last minute, go... no cavalry's coming. Nobody wants to save Ukraine. Ukraine is a mess. Ukraine's too corrupt. And those who did try to save Ukraine are totally frustrated and given up because they won't listen. They won't listen to advice. They keep telling you that you're a Russian agent. Or worse, they kidnap you, torture you, and steal your pay. Because they always take the lowest route. They always act like animals and only think about their short-term gratification. Now, this cauldron, of course, will hold for a few weeks before it will collapse, or it could collapse tomorrow. Nobody knows for certain. But what is certain is I was right. The Russians are coming up here to basically put this under siege, to weaken all this. While obviously they'll open up operations, realising they can't close the gap here. So they're going to uproot the Ukrainians in this area, however which way they can, while they try to figure out how to advance down here. They have advanced a little bit, but not much. But again, where is it? See, they've advanced up to towns. They are going to break out eventually through here and bubble out this, because this is going to be the one they take out to weaken all of this around it. Same here, if you zoom in, they'll head for this town. to then basically siege this town, basically wear it down, and then come down here, taking these two out. This might be the last to fall, but it might be the first to fall. But I'm betting that they'll take this out, lay siege to this too, and then take this one out to completely cut it off, so they could come up here and cut this off, leaving the Ukrainians. See, if they allow the Ukrainians to back up to here, that'll make it longer. They cut this off, they'll either have to retreat up this road, but they'll come up and put them under fire, put them under pressure, so they're leaving this open for now and putting this under fire to pressure them to go. See, the Russians don't want Ukrainian prisoners. They want the Ukrainians to withdraw. And because the Ukrainians won't withdraw, they're forced to hunt them down and wear them out. But my suspicion is that these blue lines, these older, that Russia is looking to use the rivers and the mountains of Ukraine and the vast open areas, basically in a blitz of destruction of these smaller towns. But originally I think they were going to come through here and take everything up to Zaporozhye and then go around Mariupol down to here. But given the time restraints, I think they're going to I still think they still might take or look to take this through here, cut through here, and cut through here. Cut this effectively off, right? So it might be a huge propaganda victory for Ukraine, but they might have to sever parts of Donetsk. They're probably not going to take most of Zaporozhye, so they're going to have to cut off through here. And for Kherson, I think they're going to have to just leave it as it is and call it quits in 30 days. They've set the time. They've set the markers. Now we're going to see the next 6 weeks, six weeks at most, more likely 4 weeks, of intense action. So we should see increased rail movement all across Russia. We should see increased air movement. Tomorrow we should hear about whether or not there's more men coming to the front. But so far Russia hasn't made any announcements about new recruits, which is another signal they're ending the war. And another signal, of course, is, as I said yesterday, the talks will be over very quickly. They will just present each other with the proposals for the next round of talks. They've already worked out all the details, and as I said, all the details have been worked out ahead of time. They're just swapping papers with their signatures on it. They didn't expect any breakthroughs. They didn't think it was possible. Talks lasted for 40 minutes, a lot less than I thought they would. Now, largest proportion of state expenditures are being allocated towards Ukraine's defences. That's why he wants to cut. And it's not an audit of government spending. He's looking for cutting the amount of men out of the government to send them to the front line for his final push. Zelensky still wants his offensive. That's why he's bought so many weapons. This is the last offensive Ukraine could mount. I expect they are probably going to throw everything at the Russians over the next 6 to 8 weeks. I think they're going to try and run down the clock on Russia with a massive offensive operation. But, as Poland says, the fastest way for Ukraine to support... Sorry, the fastest way for Ukraine to lose EU support is to do nothing about its corruption. And that's what everybody is believing, particularly in Poland. and as a corrupt country will not make it in the EU. Because people realise and that they can't take on another debtor state. And EU is looking at Ukraine saying, we're not putting half our budget into Ukraine. Fuck off, get out of here. Basically, again, however, the reason for all this meeting was, this was the whole point of the meeting, to set the terms for when the final, my guess is that they've swapped terms. They've put, I don't exactly know the process, but I do believe what they do is they list all their points out from 1 to 10. And then what they do is they basically try to come to a consensus where everybody, the negotiators, rearrange their talking points so that they got 5 of ours and 5 of theirs. And they're just trying to put the lines through. So they're obviously going to have more talking points than get listed, but they're cutting down the list. Now, if this is the final meeting, that means both sides have their talking points. And now they fill in the what ifs, right? Who's going to enforce it? What's going to happen? I think the US has made it clear they're going to use tariffs and sanctions, and that Russia's trying to keep European troops and missiles out of Ukraine. We'll see what is and what isn't. Because remember, if they put missiles in Ukraine, Russia puts missiles in Belarus. So, although, we'll see what happens. Though the meeting would not automatically end the conflict, it's pretty much expected that that's the only time that Putin is going to meet, if the meeting will end the conflict. And that's been the delay, because Zelensky won't. Zelensky just wants to shout at Putin. And you saw what happened when he tried that with Trump. He said, shut the fuck up, you little bitch. All right, Ursula von der Leyen. As I said earlier, why won't the Ukraine war end? Because Ursula von der Leyen doesn't want it to end. She wants to weaken Russia because it's the only way Europe can expand into Ukraine. But here's the problem. You're not allowed to be corrupt. She's allowed to be corrupt. She's allowed to take private meetings with Pfizer or Pfizer, however you want to say corrupt. But Big Pharma can buy her off because it's legal corruption. It's political support. See, folks, there's no such thing as anti-corruption. It's just regulated corruption, political donations, and secret deals, which give some countries favourable pricing and favourable deliveries. And by favourable, we mean favourable to Big Pharma, not to you. So, under legislation, Ukraine has pretty much the National Anti-Corruption Bureau and the Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office were placed under Prosecutor General, a political appointee. Controversial law in the light of claims the agency was subject to Russian influence. That is all coming undone. The EU put these organisations into places and they were monitoring them. Zelensky's been a paranoid, delusional dipshit. Now, why did Zelensky do this? To put pressure on the EU to give him more money to end the war. Everything Zelensky does, we keep saying, but if there's no more with Russia, and this Russian delusion is going to continue for some time. Okay? Zelensky wants to start a new Cold War because during the Cold War, he saw Germany make a lot of money and Vienna and all these meetings. He wants to do that with Ukraine. Wants to turn Ukraine into the focus of the world. where most people just want to drop a deuce on Ukraine on their way to Paris or London, or vice versa, on their way to Moscow. Nobody wants Ukraine except for the people who go to Ukraine for sex tourism, which used to be a billion-dollar industry in Ukraine. I say used to be because right now nobody wants to go to Ukraine because your hotel might collapse on you. And not just because of Russian drones, because they're shoddy buildings built by China. Alright, so Russian forces have taken another town. Ukraine hasn't marked it off the map like many others. Russian Navy has undergone missile training drills. People were expecting Russia to strike Ukraine today, and like I said, I believe that strike was called off after the mass protests broke out, because Russia wanted to see whether or not these mass protests would influence Zelensky, and if they did, now they want to see whether or not they can use this to ferment more pressure on Zelensky. Which is why Zelensky has always cracked down on protesters, but it's a tactic. The US tried to use colour revolutions. I warned you. Everything you can do, somebody else will eventually do to you. Now, like I said, the Zelensky backed off, not because of Russia or the US. Actually, this is Ursula von der Leyen and Poland. They both, but Ukraine erupted with anger, but they're trying to make out that it's first protest. No, this is one of many protests, but this is the first successful protest in Ukraine. It won't be the last. And whether or not Russia influences these protests to become an end to the war, as you can see, it is likely not to be the be-all, end-all of Ukraine, but it will definitely impact decision-making going forward, and people in glass houses throwing stones at Russia should be very careful, because Russia could always throw more stones back. And that is what Ukraine is finding out the hard way. Fuck around, find out. So, whether or not it comes to an end in 6 weeks, like I said, this is only the beginning of the end. It's hard to say exactly how long, because historically, wars tended to end quicker. It's only since World War I have wars taken longer to end. And the reason why wars taken longer to end is because little states think that they can be uber destructive up until the last minute, because somebody will come in and repair them. And if more countries step up and saying, no, Ukraine, we're not going to repair you, that will be huge pressure on Zelensky to end the war. Thank you for watching. Please like, share and subscribe, and please support the channel. There's a number of ways you can support the channel. Primarily Patreon. My writing and my RPG Patreon are separate. Thanks to global censorship, which started not last week, not last month, not even last year. It's been going on for quite a number of years now. But thank you to all those who do support the channel on Patreon. Now, buy my books, buy my merch. All my links are in the link tree description below or in my profile. Please and thank you. See you in the next video, and bye for now.